Good morning and welcome to our worship service today. And welcome to Alan and Bridget and Ken, who will be assisting in our service. I begin with lighting the candle. The prayer, lead us, Holy Wisdom, light of the resurrection, star in our darkness, weaver of grace. Even the darkness is not dark to you, shine in our lives and in our actions. Lead us, Holy Wisdom, when we walk in the grey gloom, when pain drains all the color from life, when we are fearful of the darkness. Even the darkness is not dark to you. Shine in our lives and in our actions. Lead us, Holy Wisdom, hope of resurrection, so that we might give courage to others to help light their way. Even the darkness is not dark to you. Shine in our lives and in our actions. Now you might like to pause this video and click on the link to the graduate choir. Yes, we've got something actually from New Zealand in terms of choirs this morning. This is Terence Maskel's choir performing at Pitt Street Methodist Church. The hymn, O Loving God, Forever Kind. Dear Lord. We let go of existence, meaning, and the sublime as categories to describe the object God. Yet as we affirm the world in love, we indirectly sense that in letting go of God, we have, in fact, found ourselves at the very threshold of God. You may call God love, you may call God goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. In order to be truthful, we must do more than speak the truth. We must also hear the truth. We must also receive truth. We must also act upon truth, the difficult truth, within and around us. We must devote ourselves to truth, otherwise we are dishonest and our lives are mistaken. May we be granted the strength and the courage to be truthful. O God, who has bound us together in this bundle of life, give us grace to understand how our lives depend upon the courage, the industry, the honesty, and the integrity of our fellow citizens, that we may be mindful of their needs, grateful for their faithfulness, and truthful in our responsibilities to them. Amen. I'd like to now invite Bridget to read from 1 Kings 19.
Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. Then the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And I now invite Ken to come and read to us from the book of Colossians.
As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you almost must forgive. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body, and be thankful.
Thank you, Ken. In the last 6 weeks, like others, I've been doing some tidying and sorting around the house. When it comes to a book, that involves familiarizing myself once again with the story, and if it's a good one, rereading it. You can see that sorting takes quite a while in my house. With encouragement from the younger members of our congregation, I've been reading some of these books, the children's books, the ones with well-thumbed pages, on my weekly YouTube recording. Nearly every child's book I've looked at, and that includes some teenage fiction too, some of the classics like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, has an angle on the perennial question, what matters? It's Zwibble. I love that story. How do you put dinosaurs and fairies together in the same children's story? Anyway, I read it this week, and it answers that question about what matters, to say saving babies, friendship, and courage. And Harry Potter, I watched the whole movie set again with my children, is similar. It's the power of love, power of friends, loyalty, and bravery. And then the medium of these stories is part of the message too, imagination and fun. These stories also subtly and sometimes directly offer a critique of other messages children as well as adults receive about what matters, like the clothes you wear, or the house you live in, your popularity, your income, the power you have over others. Sometimes books like Harry Potter imagine a context where what is normative is no longer so. J.K. Rowling imagines the rise of a great villain who plunges the world into war. J.R.R. Tolkien imagines likewise. A time of crisis is used by these authors to raise the question of what matters. And for Tolkien, World War I and World War II were the crises through which he lived, and out of which he created an imaginary world where moral choices would need to be made. This current time, with a worldwide pandemic with some 300,000 deaths, is also a time of crisis. The word crisis is a Latinized version of the Greek word krisis, and krisis has a sense of a turning point or a critical decision-making moment. There was an article in the Paris Review last week that explored this crisis turning point idea on a personal level. The author, Sabrina Mark, is an American who now, like many of her compatriots living in a bubble in a country with mixed messaging about bubbles, and that mixed messaging giving rise to uncertainty and fear. The article contrasts the author's experience interviewing for a professorship at American University in February this year, and her experience now as the teacher of 2 sons in her bubble. All the angst of that professorial interviewing process, the trying to impress, dressing up right, the projecting of oneself, a self sometimes hard to recognize, all strategies to gain a job, a respected position, more income and the like, are all now reassessed in the light of a virus, death, the fragility of life, the relativity of income and need, and the fallacy of status. Is real life, truth, a life with things, with status based on what we do, earn, or own? Or is real life something else? These questions are not dissimilar to what many children's books ask. On a personal level, most of us have been on some form of retreat away from the usual, the expected. For some, that retreat has been a busy time, learning both new skills and ways of coping with both old demands and new demands. It's been a time of change, and change can bring a bucket full of stress. For others, that retreat has been a quieter time, a time of cleaning up, cleaning out, fixing, reorganizing, baking, and other pursuits. The purpose of retreats, and I've purposely used that word which has a spiritual connotation, is not only to desist from what we've been doing, but to refocus, to recalibrate in order to prioritize what really matters. Retreats can be turning points. When thinking about turning points, I've been intrigued by what's happening for Piers Morgan. As you might imagine, I'm no fan of Piers Morgan. The Times interviewer Decca Aikenhead likens his career to a kid who picks as many playground fights as possible in order to make a name for himself. And in that career, he found friendship with another playground brawler called Donald. What intrigues me is his reasoning behind his current falling out with Donald. In talking in the Times interview, Piers says, let's put all the stupidity and the nonsense and the silliness and the point scoring and the culture wars behind us. All that stuff has to be changed. We have to put all our concerted energy into being different people coming out of this, better people. Because this whole crisis, I think, has been a recalibration for everybody about everything. Piers, be careful. This is conversion language you're using. This is seeing the big picture language and realizing, not unlike Sabrina Mark's experience, that you're wanting or needing change. And of course, real conversion leads to embodiment, living your words going forward. Speaking of embodiment, I came across a great little quote the other day from John Bartley. Jonathan is a progressive Christian. He's also the co-leader of the Green Party in England and Wales, and an old friend of mine. And John said that for Christians, what we understand by truth has to be embodied. And the embodiment of truth for Christians is acts of compassion. It's similar to that quote I used in the service sheet from Meister Eckhart. You may call God love, you may call God goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. The God truth, the real of God is compassion. Compassion is one of those things that matters, that really matter. So how do we build an economy where compassion really matters? Or how do we build a faith community where compassion is our purpose and our plumb line? Or how do we help peers and others who want to take off the old garments of narcissism, pulling people down and point scoring, and put on the new garments of cooperation, building each other up, and compassion? And you'll note this metaphor of new garments and old garments I'm borrowing from that reading in Colossians. My Tuesday edition, back on the 5th of May, I wrote about Julian of Norwich, who lived from 1343 to 1416. Her entire life was lived within the reality of the Black Death, which resulted in the deaths of a third of the population of Europe. In that terrible context, she writes about what matters, namely joy, gratitude, and goodness. And Julian both embodies or seeks to embody that joy, gratitude, and goodness, but also she finds it in the world about her. She hears the word of the Lord in the singing of a bird and the cascading of a brook. She sees the goodness in others and in creation and celebrates it. But what I didn't write about back on the 5th of May was that the truth that she embodied was not triumphant. It didn't win the day. Fear, ignorance, and the use of fear to aggrandize power won the day. The Black Death, with no science to comprehend it, replaced respect for the sacredness of creation that had dominated the spiritual consciousness of Julian's predecessors in the Middle Ages, people like Meister Eckhart. It was replaced with the fear of nature. Fear and blame came to predominate. Jews were once again made into scapegoats, as were women, witch burning, and often the destruction of cats, which accompanied some of these frenzied responses to the pandemic. People projected blame, and leaders, political and religious, cultivated those projections. We need to be very wary of peddlers of fear and blame. It's interesting that in a famous stained glass window of Julian, her ginger cat is prominently displayed, a subtle critique of this projection and fear and blame. I began this sermon talking about children's books and how authors often thread their stories with suggestions, imperatives even, about what matters. In the context of colorful and imaginative stories, they spin tales that help us at turning points, at crises. The authors, or maybe it's only the ones I read, seem to be committed to the well-being of their audience. When we come to stories in the Bible, though, the motivation of the authors and later editors are mixed at best. Books purporting to be history, like our text from 1 Kings 19, often are written to please the author's patron. Yet sometimes into these stories there is a subtle counter-narrative that the patron might not be too pleased about. 1 Kings 19 is a story about crisis. The text begins with violence. Elijah, believing it is God's will to slaughter false prophets and dispatching 450 of them, flees from the political consequences. And he's scared of those consequences. He goes into the desert. He wants to die. Then God's angel turns up with some takeaways. And this gives Elijah a calorie boost that allegedly lasts for 40 days. Some takeaways, huh? Anyway, Elijah next appears at Mount Horeb. Here the text gets interesting. The God character, and it's always helpful, as Karen Armstrong reminds us, to presume God as a character and not the same character as we might have met in the scriptures before or after our text. So this God character asks Elijah, "What are you doing here?" And Elijah tells God what a great murdering job that Elijah's done. God says nothing. Instead of refuting Elijah, God announces God's presence, which ultimately comes not in wind, earthquake, or fire, but in the sound of sheer silence. That is nothing. Then God asks exactly the same question of Elijah as before. "What are you doing here?" And Elijah, imagining God has a hearing difficulty, repeats himself. I'd like to suggest to you that in the nothingness, the sound of sheer silence, and in the repetition of the question, "What are you doing here?" there is a theological challenge happening that Elijah doesn't get. In this crisis, in the fear of this time, there's an opportunity for Elijah to change what he's been doing. But he doesn't hear this wholly new experience of God, this silence, this power of nothingness. He doesn't hear, as one translation puts it, the whisper that might not only challenge his murdering behavior, but also how he understands divinity. Maybe there is a whole different way of godness that doesn't involve zeal and retribution and proving that my one is bigger and better than your one. St. John of the Cross once said, "Go where you are nothing." So maybe the takeaway from this old story is simply this. In the midst of a crisis, when we experience something wholly new, will we learn from it? Or when the crisis passes, will we just carry on like we've always done in the past? We'll now listen to a piece of reflected music from Queen's College in Oxford.
Miłość nas osiąga.
We come now to our prayers, and Alan Davidson will be leading us. So let us hold in our hearts and minds those for whom we are concerned.
Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. God of compassion, we remember those who are suffering in this time of change, those who have lost their jobs and now live with uncertainty, those whose businesses are struggling, facing a precarious future, those whose health has been compromised by delays, those who live with the recent death of someone loved. Compassionate God, be seen and known through the compassion of your people. God of kindness, we remember those who have struggled with life in the time of lockdown, those who are lonely and depressed without the kindness of friends, those whose mental health has been compromised by rising levels of anxiety, those who have suffered from domestic or parental abuse, deprived of support, those who have experienced rejection or betrayal from those they trusted. God of kindness, be seen and known through the kindness of your people. God of humility, we remember those who serve in our community, our country and our world. Politicians making difficult decisions, balancing economics and the needs of people. Nurses, doctors and medical workers who put the needs of others before their own. Firefighters and ambulance staff who go out to the injured and the ill, not always knowing what to find. Police who maintain our safety, restoring peace where there is tension. God of humility, be seen and known through the service of your people. God of meekness, we remember those who are often overlooked, but whose work we have been reminded is essential for our well-being. Cleaners and supermarket workers who make it possible for us to buy what we need. Food banks and charities that provide support for those requiring food. Rubbish collectors and street sweepers who deal with our trash. Bus and train drivers who enable public transport to operate. God of meekness, be seen and known through the caring of your people. God of patience, we remember the renewing experiences of these last weeks, the songs of birds heard without the masking roar of traffic, the clear blue skies without the dulling effects of pollution, the sounds of children laughing and playing during the week, the sounds of silence as the busy world has stopped and taken a sabbatical. God of patience, be in our learning to live in harmony with our world and each other. May the earth be refreshed and renewed. May we recognize the needs of others. May we live compassion, show kindness, be humble in our service, meek in our caring of others, and recognize the value of silence. May we bless and be blessed. Amen.
Now, I'd like to click on the link to the guitar-led version of Our Father which art in heaven. And the prayers as we go. Just to be tender, just to be true, just to be glad the whole day through, just to be merciful, just to be mild, just to be trustful as a child, just to be gentle and kind and sweet, just to be helpful with willing feet, just to be cheery when things go wrong, just to drive sadness away with a song. Whether the hour is dark or bright, just to be faithful in God's sight, just to let love be our daily key. This is truth's wish for you and me. As we go grateful, thoughtful, and blessed, may we know afresh the deep truth that arises from a just love and compassion for all humanity, the truth that is God. May we value that truth, serve that truth, and defend that truth. Amen. Again, you may wish to pause and listen to Southwark Cathedral singing "Who Would True Valor See?" Now the blessing. Blessed are those who love without why. Love doesn't need a reason. If it did, is it love? Blessed are those who live without why. No reason, just living for the joy of it, appreciative, content. Blessed are those who work without why, making, creating, it's just what they do, like a rose blooming. Blessed are we when in our true home, compassion, in the love that doesn't need a reason, but is the healing of the world. Amen.